this very deliberate escapism from the hardships of her childhood and the experience of migrating to a very new country. Her dresses feature motifs such as hearts, stars, fruits, flowers, and bows. They have a lot of sparkles, a lot of glitter, and just a touch of avant-garde. The strawberry dress is a midi-length dress, which is going to be relevant later on. And it's made entirely of tulle, embellished with glittering strawberries. It has short, poofy sleeves, ruffles at the hem and collar, and a little tie-up feature at the waist. It is part of a line of similar dresses released by the designer at around the same time, which feature fruit motifs like cherry, watermelon, lemon, blueberry, and there's a version of the dress in black, which is equally as popular as the pink version, but we'll bring it back in again later in the presentation. So just a very brief introduction to the theory. The lens I'll be employing is derived from Bruno Latour's actor network theory. The theory posits that within a system there exist a number of actors, both human and non-human, and who are connected to each other through a series of associations. The social, as he terms it, is such an assemblage where human agents and non-human agents and processes influence each other and interact with each other. This interaction is continuous and keeps the social in a state of flux. Actors can be both human and non-human, which provides the space for technological and sociological processes to be highlighted as well. Moreover, instead of simply carrying meaning forward, actors in a network actively transform the meaning through their interactions. In this case, the digital platforms that we will be discussing are actively playing a role in transforming the status of the strawberry dress within the cultural zeitgeist through their technological affordances and user interface. By engaging with cultural objects like language, art, and yes, fashion, consumers interject their own meanings into the objects and destabilize the social relations governing them. It is important to note that the network is not geographically placed or distinguished by size, and so it allows us to consider social relations from a very wide lens and a wider perspective, which is not bound by particular geographies or countries, but it's helpful for analyzing global phenomena such as digital consumption and virtual engagement. So just a brief overview of the methodology I used. I started from the approach taken by Joanne Entwistle, where she isolated a part of the network when she was doing her study of the It bag and blogs, fashion blogs for the book Thinking Through Fashion. And so I kind of followed in that, where I isolated a part of the network in the digital scape and focused largely on tracing how users use the communicative strategies that were afforded to them by social media platforms, and how these interactions led to the formation of microcultures in the digital sphere. The two key social networking sites that I bring in are Instagram and YouTube, though I will occasionally reference Pinterest and TikTok as parallel sites of consumption. So, let us start tracing the network. This is kind of the starting point of the paper, where I'm showing a Google Trends graph, which is just the search results for the term strawberry dress from the year 2020 to 2024, which is when I was conducting this research, so I kind of had to stop it there. Even though now we're in 2026, so there might be more spikes, possibly by my own incessant searching of the term, but clearly there was a spike in the August of 2020, and while 2021 has some degree of interest, it just falls flat after that. And so it really helps us contextualize that the dress was popular in that moment of time. It did not remain as popular, but in that particular summer of 2020, I wonder what could have been happening then, it became really, really popular. So why? Of course, you can't talk about summer of 2020 without talking about COVID. The spread of COVID-19 is tied intimately with the displacement of everyday life and heightened online engagement. Online became the default mode of being, and social media sites became the hubs of social interaction. News was spread through digital channels and consumed in real time. New forms of content were introduced to keep up with the demand for heightened engagement, short-form video content on TikTok, Instagram Reels, as well as YouTube Shorts. In this context, one of the first sightings of the strawberry dress was actually in the January of 2020, where model Tess Holliday wore the design on the Grammys red carpet. This at the time was not received well because of the model's own plus size body and the idea of whimsy not yet being so central to digital microtrends as it is now. By August of 2020, at the height of its fame, the dress had been covered by multiple fashion media outlets and which noted its prominence on social media in particular. Since cultural consumption at the time was performed through digital channels, social media platforms became the sites of cultural dissemination. Within this emerging paradigm of digital consumption, we also saw the rise of another actor within this dresses network, online subcultures. So online subcultures have been a part of Web 3.0 since its very beginning. And if you need clarification on any of these terms, I'll be happy to provide that. The emo scene kids of Tumblr, the Visco girl, and the hipster trends of the 2010s were all fashion subcultures that had a thriving online presence and used particular digital platforms as their primary site of engagement. Aesthetic subcultures, like dark academia, right there, had been prevalent within niche communities on Tumblr, Reddit, Pinterest, and Instagram before exploding into public consciousness through avenues like BookTok and Bookstagram. However, during the pandemic, as digital engagement heightened, more and more people were exposed to these subcultures and gravitated towards them. These allowed users to play around with different styles. They were fluid and evolved with the people who were taking part in them. Unlike the subcultures of the 20th century that were explored by Dick Hebdige, which were rooted in political ideologies and activism, these online subcultures were largely forms of escapism, allowing users to escape their reality through a bricolage performance of audiovisual content and dress inspirations. In many of the subcultures that use core or girl suffixes, users are under no obligation to stick to one of them. They can move around, try on different styles, and incorporate them into their online performance. Online subcultures are thus ephemeral identity kits that users could appropriate to perform in online spaces without it having any impact on their lifestyle. Aesthetic sensibilities are supported by audiovisual or textual affordances on social media that allow for endless user customization. Rather than engaging deeply with the sources of the images, users picked and chose what aspect of a particular media they wanted to appropriate. This led to communities being formed around empty visuals, detached from their sources, book quotes with no context, and playlists that were driven by vibes, as agreed to by popular consensus, of course. Users could temporarily occupy a digital community, perform a certain identity on social media, and then move on to the next. This fluidity and the rush of temporary belonging were key for social media users who were looking to escape their reality and slip into a different world, but only for a moment. It must also be noted that online subcultures, unlike earlier subcultural formations, did not reject mainstream fashion brands or distance themselves from corporations. In fact, many of them prescribed certain brands through their kind of aesthetic collaging. Ralph Lauren became really associated with the dark academia community because it had implications of wealth as well as elite higher education institutions which were coveted by the subcultures. Burberry was similarly popular. For subcultures like mermaidcore, brands like Blue Marine and Miss Sohi Couture were very popular because they had oceanic references and the material was flowy, which added to that very water imagery. The big bad boy. Amongst all these many subcultures, cottagecore emerged as one of the biggest. As the name suggests, it harkens to a simpler rural lifestyle, portraying life in an idyllic cottage as the aspirational goal. Deriving from Victorian Romanticism, cottagecore represented the desire to run away to a cottage in woods, live amongst nature, and distance oneself from the bustle of city life. Pastoral imagery included swaths of untouched greenery, farm animals, and slow consumption practices that rejected hustle culture. Proponents of cottagecore rejected modernity and appealed to rustic sensibilities that focused on slow community-based living. Stylistically, it borrowed from medievalism, romanticism, Art Nouveau imagery, movements like the arts and crafts movement, as well as counterculture movements of the late 1960s and 70s. They promoted practices like gardening, growing one's own produce, making dishes from scratch, using natural materials and fabrics in clothing, taking part in handmade crafts, and exchanging goods in place of selling, as well as being mindful through labor and other similar practices. It built upon the existing DIY culture that had thrived in the 2000s and advocated for intentional sustainable consumption. It also promoted the use of natural fabrics, cotton, linen, wool, and as well as synthetic fabrics which could lend a flowing, ethereal quality to the silhouette. It kind of brought into its sphere games as well, like Animal Crossing, which included elements of crafting and bartering, and thus kind of resonated with the cottagecore creed. The fashion also took inspirations from TV shows like Anne with an E and Bridgerton, movies like Autumn de Wilde's Emma and Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, as well as the 2015 live-action version of Cinderella, which all had this very rustic, rural setting. In terms of music, cottagecore really gravitated towards Taylor Swift's folklore and Evermore albums, which featured similar imagery and had a very idyllic feel to them. Peasant dresses, empire waistlines, Edwardian blouses that featured lots of ruffles and lace, loose flowing silhouettes that were still curvy and feminine. Popular motifs included flowers, vines, fruits, mushrooms, fairies, and farm animals. So the overall idea was to play into the fantasy of running away from the city and living in nature, fully self-sufficient and content with minimal amenities. So it's kind of parallel to cottagecore that we see the rise of the strawberry dress. Sorry. Imagine as a dress in which one would frolic around in a meadow, collecting strawberries during the summer. The strawberry dress fulfilled the romantic fantasy that was promised by cottagecore. It was described, and this is an actual description used in a news article, as fluffy and frothy by media outlets and was meant to evoke the sense of softness and femininity. The strawberries tie in with the idea of nature, as well as the idea of picking one's fruit from the garden and very large fields where one could just go and get produce from. And the glitter adds a dash of glamour and frivolity. According to Henry Wilkinson, who posted about the dress on his Instagram page and regularly dissects a lot of fashion history and fashion media, dresses featuring quirky fruits or nature-based imagery are appealing because they add a youthful twist and play to our need for good old-fashioned fun. So this idea of fun was very much intertwined with the fruits and the frolicking imagery. It is important to note that this symbolism is also enmeshed with the phenomenological. The full skirt, with its layers and layers of tulle, adds a playful feel and scores very high in terms of twirlability. It adds movement and dynamism to the dress, which people made very good use of. It also lends it a similar quality like a princess ball gown or a very high fashion celebrity red carpet dress. I have mentioned the 2015 Disney's live action Cinderella, but the blue gown that was designed by Sandy Powell for that film also made use of excessive tulle. And this is kind of not exactly a reference to that dress, but it follows a similar creed of people imagining themselves in the position of a princess or a fairy tale character. But of course, it's much more practical to move around in and actually do stuff instead of a ball gown. The ruffles and the softened lines were part of the cottagecore creed, and the big poofy sleeves reference historical styles, which evokes a sense of pre-industrial clothing, while also, again, being very princess-like. The waist ties reference other trending elements of the time, particularly bows and corsets. And while the dress itself isn't corseted, it does cinch the waist to create that kind of shape, which was very popular at the time. The adjustable nature of the dress, again, because it can be tied up, adds a new dimension to its popularity, making it so that it can accommodate a wide range of sizes and still suit different bodies. The color worked across a range of skin tones, darker and lighter, and so the dress also became a way for individuals who had historically been excluded from Eurocentric, skinny-bodied fashion trends to negotiate visibility and participate in online fashion trends. It also provided them the opportunity to negotiate femininity and gender expression. The strawberry dress represented a counter-discourse to the strand of neoliberal feminist expression that had become dominant in the late 2010s. within this brand of corporate feminism, which I also refer to as girl boss feminism, values like consumption, individualism, and self-improvement through economic growth are coveted. Traditionally feminine attire and colors like pink, which are embedded with gendered connotations, are rejected alongside pursuits like cooking, crafts, homemaking, as well as family life, religion, and community, in the favor of neutral, most often masculine dress, and a focus on economic success. The girl boss uniform is thus rooted in corporate attire, sharp blazers, crisp shirts, and usually trousers. Cottagecore, and thus the strawberry dress, deflects the urban capitalist paradigm and detaches the value of women away from their work. By employing the female gaze within female dressing, the dress deliberately uses hyperfemininity to uphold transgressive ideas of nature, relaxation, community, and romance that have been rejected within the girl boss culture. It is also very important to note that Sapphic communities have historically championed this idea of community living, of discarding the male gaze and discovering feminine joy through community. And so the strawberry dress was also used by queer individuals, trans and trans non-binary and other genderqueer users to ascribe to a performance of hyperfemininity that allowed them to negotiate a gendered bodily expression. I have very little time left. No worries. I will very quickly touch upon the DIY community because they were really profoundly important to the strawberry dress's popularity. DIY dressmakers on YouTube and Instagram broke down the dress's construction and made the pattern available for people to use. And so it could be recreated endlessly through customization, and users could also add their own preferences, their own needs to accommodate disability, to work with different shades of fabric, but still get the same sensory and symbolistic pleasure out of the dress. And so, yeah, we can still see among all of these creators, there's a desire to partake in the dress's association with cottagecore and hyperfeminine performance. Mutability and customization were key to the dress's network. The digital becoming the means through which clothing and the body were constantly being negotiated. And so social media became not only the site where the dress was brought into public eye, but also where it was weighed and assessed, intertwining with other topics of interest and becoming part of the social media landscape of the early 2020s. The key kind of space, digital space, where I first encountered the strawberry dress was in fandom communities. So fanfiction, fan edits, fan arts are an important part of Web 3.0, and fan communities have historically taken part in appropriating characters from their preferred media, inserting them into different universes, or creating their own characters and then putting them into a media's universe. So it's kind of like creating an original character, putting it into the Star Wars universe just because you want your own character to be there, or making Leia into a 2020s suburban mom. The possibilities are endless, actually. For queer fans in particular, fan art is a way to appropriate existing media and explore their own identity from a queer gaze. And so fans add value and meaning through their consumption practice to build upon existing storytelling. Yeah, perfect. And so the strawberry dress, with its connotations of hyperfemininity and rural living, provides ample opportunities for reconstruction through fan consumption. It allows for varied expression within feminine and queer performance, and this is where I'll bring back the black strawberry dress, which was more closely associated with goth and butch characters. So it offered a slightly different interpretation of femininity than the pink counterpart. By creating a visual contrast between two characters that fall into butch and femme or other binary archetypes, the dress offers space for individuals to play around with gender and sexuality. Very quickly, it's also used to reinforce gendered expression, because in this fan art from the Umbrella Academy, we can see Victor and Klaus, two of the characters, and Victor had recently come out as a trans man within the show. And so the strawberry print is used as in the form of a shirt to kind of reinforce that masculine identity. But for Klaus, who is more gender fluid with his approach to clothing, they use the dress version to emphasize how this character is playing around with gender and sexuality and has a very different approach to both of these issues. I cannot mention cottagecore without mentioning trad wives, unfortunately. And so the length of the dress is longer than the kind of usual knee length or mini dresses that have been getting popular before this era. And so it appeals to individuals who also prefer modest styles. There are ways to customize the dress and kind of play around with the sheerness of it, which is a very interesting element. However, that notion of modesty also puts it in close associations with the trad wife movement, which has a lot visually in overlapping in terms with the cottagecore content. And so it's kind of become this phenomena where online subcultures are blurring into each other, and where the meaning associated with each of them is also getting constantly revised through public discussion, and as new consensus regarding the signified emerges, I completely lost that. As various users make use of the platform to express and engage with the sign itself. This is a key characteristic of online subcultures, where meaning transmitted through social media posts, user-generated content, as well as industry appropriation, gets renegotiated constantly and deviates from its initial implications. Other times, different communities insert their own preferences within this dominant narrative, thus giving rise to offshoots. The strawberry dress has been appropriated by different offshoots of cottagecore like naturecore, fairycore, and yes, trad wife. It has become part of the digital identity toolkit used by content creators as shorthand for adherence to particular trends. It is still used in fan arts and remains culturally relevant as a remnant of its past virality, but that virality is very much confined to fandom spaces now instead of going all across the board. The dress has thus become enmeshed within a larger network of actants, human and non-human, facilitated by digital affordances and consumed by users who use clothing to express and mediate their online presence. Thank you very much.